How do you tell a story without saying much? How do you make an impact without being noticed? This is the story of Mizu, somebody in between. Between nationalities, genders, between fiery rage and the desire to live in peace. The music that illustrates Mizu is also two-folded. On the one side we have the cold open fifths of the ice motif that you just heard, and on the other we have the warm strings and the free-floating shakuhachi melody of the Ember theme. This is the music of Blue Eye Samurai. Just like Mizu, the music of this anime series stands between two traditions. On the one hand, the Western string orchestra paired with modern production techniques, and on the other, traditional Japanese solo instruments like the shakuhachi, a bamboo flute which Buddhist monks used for meditation. But first of all, the music of the show is one thing: it's stealthy. The power of the score lies in its minimalistic subtlety, not in its immediate visibility. So today let's have a closer look how the composer of the show, Amy Doherty, masters what I call the art of the stealthy score. In the moments when Mizu reaches new stages along this journey of revenge, we can hear the ice motif and the Ember theme combined, telling us of a cold and calculating samurai, but also of somebody who just wants to live in freedom and who cares for others. The majestic view over Kyoto is painted with lush string chords who support the shakuhachi and the high solo cello playing the Ember theme. Doherty doesn't need any brass or woodwind instruments here to create a rich and sublime sound. Everything from the melody to the chords to the orchestration is kept simple and clear. Of course, the middle section of this cue stands out, but what makes it stealthy is the beginning and the end. The cue starts with only two sustained notes in the high strings, a C and a G. These two pedal tones are held for almost the entire cue. This is the canvas on top of which all the other musical elements are placed and held together. The silky timbre of the high violins fades in from silence, and later the cue ends with a diminuendo until the pedal tones disappear unnoticed in the sounds of the streets. And basically that's how the music of Blue Eye Samurai sneaks up, evolves and vanishes over and over again. This pedal tone technique became really popular in film music through the film American Beauty, scored by Thomas Newman. The Ember theme of Mizu evolves over time, and along this journey we can hear different variations of it depending on the level of tension and the setting. A shamisen is playing the Ember theme here, accompanying the traditional Japanese puppet theater called bunraku. Just like the visual language, the music of Blue Eye Samurai is full of Japanese instruments and influences. Which brings us to the next principle, how to merge the story and the soundtrack even further. In the introduction of the first episode, we can hear another musical theme, which is thematically attached to the words shown on the screen. This revenge theme can be heard whenever the antagonists of Mizo come into play. The introduction also informs us that the story takes place in the 17th century Edo period in Japan. Therefore, the revenge theme uses a mode of a classical Japanese scale called hirajoshi. This pentatonic scale is characterized by 2 minor second steps, which give it a mournful and somber sound. If you look at the upper voice of the revenge theme, you can see that these minor second steps are especially accented. The lower voice moves in parallel motion to the upper voice, a fifth below it. And I think it's no coincidence that the parallel fifths of the revenge theme, which stands for the antagonist and the father, are related to Mizo's ice motif from the beginning. Another harmonic feature of this scale is the tritone between the second and fourth note. At the end of the revenge theme, Doherty uses this dissonant interval, combining it with a big crescendo in order to show how powerful and scary Mizo's enemies will be. This is gagaku, an old form of Japanese instrumental music which was performed at the court of the emperor. A typical gagaku ensemble consists of the following instruments: hichiriki, a Japanese version of the oboe playing the melody; flutes, for example the o-teki, which also play the melody but in a slightly varied form; sho, a mouth organ adding chords high above the rest of the ensemble; plucked string instruments like the koto and the biwa; and of course the big drum taiko and other percussion instruments. While the overall tempo is very slow, the drum players can accelerate individually, which creates a permanent tempo fluctuation. And the melody notes are also not static, they are often combined with microtonal embellishments and glissandi. With this in mind, let's hear another iteration of the revenge theme from episode 2. Here we can hear an obvious reference to gagaku. The use of this imperial music underlines how strong and obsessed with power the enemies of Mizo are. Some instruments come directly from the gagaku ensemble, most notably the hichiriki with its piercing sound and the sho which opens the cue. And some instruments are translated into a Western orchestral version. For example, the taikos are substituted by the timpani and the grand kassa. The Japanese solo instruments slide between the notes of the melody, and by doing so, they add a quality to the music which I would describe as fluid. Along the way, other important characters appear whose fate will be intertwined with the one of Mizo.
Make way for Princess Akemi!
Even though one might not see it at first sight, the theme of Princess Akemi is an excellent example of musical storytelling. It starts simple, just with a 3-note ostinato and the harp, which goes on during the whole cue. Again, the composer uses a minimalistic opening as a canvas for all melodic and harmonic development that follows. The ostinato uses the notes C, F and G, forming a suspended fourth chord on C. Since this stride is missing a third, the listener is left wondering whether we are in a major or in a minor tonality. Apart from this suspenseful chord, the melody only adds one new note, which is B flat. And it starts to look like the whole cue is based on another Japanese pentatonic scale called In-sen. But if you look at the score, you will realize that there's one note missing from the scale. To sum it up this far, the beginning of Akemi's theme is suspenseful, undecided, and something is missing. So we already get a musical portrait of the princess character. Then, right in the moment when the eyes of Mizu and Akemi are meeting, the strings play a lush D-flat major chord, which delicately supports this intimate moment and makes it almost feel like they recognize each other. The D-flat major chord also reharmonizes the notes of the ostinato. The former root note C becomes the 7th and the G becomes the 11th, which gives this chord a colorful but also slightly tragic feeling. But even more important, the new chord reveals the note that was missing from the scale all along. The D-flat makes In-sen complete. Inspired by this, the viola melody now also finds its way to a high D-flat, finishing the cue on the newfound note. Akemi's theme works on multiple levels. Of course it fits the scene, but on a larger scale it also tells a story of somebody who is missing something and whose life is about to change fundamentally once it's found. But all this is presented in an unobtrusive way. The melody moves slow, the harmonies don't change very often. Amy Doherty even intentionally leaves out the D-flat in the beginning in order to bring it just in the right moment. Because she knows that sometimes subtracting elements is the right way to make your art stronger. Sometimes it's important what you don't say. Apart from Doherty's score, the soundtrack of Blue Eye Samurai also features songs in certain scenes. For example, this lovely Japanese chanson combining early jazz and folk singing. These songs stand more in the foreground than the score. And because they are obviously not from the Edo period, they add yet another facet to Blue Eye Samurai's principle of combining diverse materials. So far we've talked about the more quiet and slow cues of Blue Eye Samurai, but there's also another side. Since this show is an action anime, the music for these scenes is fast, loud and groove-driven, often using drums and modern elements such as synthesizers or distortion. But even this music is integrated in the story in a way that it feels appropriate at any given moment. And even though it's loud, it never outperforms what we see in the picture. One way to achieve this is to disguise the entrance of musical elements with dialogue and sound design. Therefore, let's have a look at the dojo fight scene from episode 1. The sound of Mizu throwing the coat away masks the start of the pedal tones in the sustained strings. Then the following dialogue hides the entrance of the jumpy violins with their crescendo. And one beat before the shamisen and the drum kicks in, the battle cry of the first attacker marks the upbeat for the full blast fight theme.
How dare you? Be warned, you face my Shindo Ryu!
The problem with Shindo Ryu is it's trash. The poor technique. Easily learned, easily defeated.
Amy Doherty intelligently composes around the dialogue and uses it as a springboard for new musical impulses. This gives the music the possibility to step into the foreground whenever it's needed, but most of the time it merges perfectly into the background and works more on a subconscious level. Once asked about the role of her film music, Amy Doherty answered like this: "I would say if the score is done well, then most people don't even notice it. That's what I love about the job, that it's a collaborative thing. It's not about my music, it's about my music as it supports this project." And that's how you make an impact without being noticed. The score of Blue Eye Samurai finds many ways to sneak in through the back door. Just like a samurai living the Bushido lifestyle, this music is restrained, stern, and powerful. But it's also fragile and values the importance of silence. Standing between Western and Japanese traditions, this music sets out to find its own way. It accompanies Mizu on this path of revenge, suffering, self-discovery, friendship, and forgiveness. It has the power to tell a big story with just a few chords, and it has melodies with carefully hidden secrets. This beautiful score engages in dialogue with the sound design, moves along with the story, and lets the pictures speak for themselves.